Welcome to the Countless Corpses podcast. I'm your host, Michael Nunley, and with me, as always, is my friend and co host, James Cottle. On today's episode, James and I are going to be talking about 1981's Halloween 2. Halloween 2 is a direct sequel to the first film, set on the exact same night of October 31st, 1978, and it is the only film to depict the morning of November 1st. Halloween 2 was originally intended to be the last chapter of the Halloween series to revolve around Michael Myers and Haddonfield. However, after the lackluster reaction to the third installment Halloween 3 Season of the Witch in 1982, Michael Myers returned 7 years later in Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers in 1988. But for today, we're covering Halloween 2 as the end of the original Halloween timeline. But before we get started, though, was there anything you wanted to say, James?
Hey, Mike, and everyone out there across the horror verse, podcast verse, however we want to kind of get into this. But I gotta say, the original Halloween 2 just really holds a special place for me in the pantheon of what has become this Halloween franchise. While overall it may not be the best film in the franchise, it does have a few of the top scenes for me in what has to be my favorite franchise out there. So there's definitely a few scenes that kind of live rent-free in my head, and so I can't wait to talk about this. So let's drive in. Let's get ready for some Dangertainment. Do you want to kick us off, Mike?
Sure thing, James. Let the Dangertainment begin, as Freddie Harris would say. Around 5.5 months after Halloween 2 was released, another horror hospital picture with a crazed killer came out called Visiting Hours in 1982. Both films featured a skull on the main movie posters. For Halloween 2, it was superimposed over a pumpkin, and with Visiting Hours, it was formed in the pattern of switched-on lights within a darkened hospital building. The theme music for Visiting Hours was even modeled after Carpenter's theme music from the 1978 film, which, of course, was also in Halloween 2.
So, I personally kind of love the movie poster for Halloween 2. It's just something, about it. And, I don't exactly call myself a toy guy, but I do have this nice little Halloween 2, if you can see that. I'm trying to get it lined up right.
Yeah,
so it's got Laurie in her hospital gown with the little stab on her arm and the broken ankle, but it definitely has this poster here. And my gosh, I just really love that poster.
That looks sweet.
Yeah, so eventually I'm going to have to track down the Michael Myers that goes with this one because it's a set. I'm not being able to find it yet. But anyway, so I'm hopefully I can find that. But, you mentioned Visiting Hours came out in 1982. And, I looked it up when we were kind of prepping for this show. So that movie came out in May of 1982 and grossed a little over $13 million on a $6 million budget. Okay. So was Visiting Hours just a complete ripoff of Halloween 2? Famously, the original Nosferatu silent film. It was a complete ripoff of the Dracula novel, but the people who did the film didn't have the rights to the book, so they literally had to change the names and the story, but everything else is literally exactly the same. So is Visiting Hours the same way? Instead of Laurie Strode, you have Linda Strider or something? I do have to say, though, I looked at the poster for the Visiting Hours, and it's definitely a lot more lackluster than what we get with Halloween 2.
The Visiting Hours poster is pretty boring and really very dated, whereas the Halloween 2 poster still looks good. I think the pixelated skull on the Visiting Hours poster just really looks crappy. I think the graphic designers on that could have done much better, even in 1982. But to answer your question, no, it's not quite that bad of a ripoff. But there are certainly some elements in Visiting Hours that are similar. Colt, the killer in the movie, does go to the hospital to kill Deborah Ballin, the final girl, and even chooses her to stalk and kill, and also her children. But the reasoning is entirely different. In visiting hours, Deborah is a feminist activist who went on a talk show to discuss her beliefs. Hearing her talk about this stuff just pissed him off. So Colt actually had hot oil thrown in his face by his mother when she was defending herself against his father, and it horribly scarred his father. It also made him hate women that defended themselves, which it's just that just seems like a real big stretch to me. Like, how dare you defend yourself? But they laid it on real thick that Colt was like just a piece of shit with an irrational hatred of women. So much so that it goes overboard, in my opinion. All of that to say, it was a totally different movie that I think just used the popularity of Halloween 2 to its advantage. For instance, in addition to the poster, Visiting Hours was originally called The Fright, but changed its name to Ride Halloween 2's coattails.
It sounds like Visiting Hours definitely sounds like a response to the feminist movement in the late 70s and early 80s. I don't really want us to get too off track with that, but I think I'm going to have to check out this film eventually. So let's go ahead and jump back into the original Halloween 2.
Oh, it was definitely a response to that movement. There is no doubt about it. You nailed it on the head with that one. But as you say, let's go back to the movie. Halloween 2 was directed by Rick Rosenthal and written by John Carpenter and Deborah Hill. But others were considered for the directing position. David Lynch, who at the time was only known for Eraserhead and The Elephant Man, was briefly considered to direct Halloween 2. Tommy Lee Wallace was originally offered the opportunity to direct Halloween 2, having worked as the editor and production designer on the 1978 film, so he was kind of already part of the family. He had his own thoughts about where to proceed with the sequel, and he was really excited to be on the project. But he was picturing something else really happening than what John Carpenter, who wrote the script, had in mind. Carpenter determined that Halloween 2 would pick up right where the original film left off, which was something that Wallace liked. But Wallace and Irwin Yablans wanted something more in line with the theater of the mind approach that the first film had. And Carpenter, according to Wallace, felt boxed in by what was expected at the time as far as lots of gore and nudity and sex. Despite some disappointment in this story direction, Wallace maintained his interest and was still set to direct, with his name even appearing as director in a 1980 trade ad released by Filmways Pictures. When Carpenter finished the script and presented it to Wallace, Tommy was extremely disappointed to discover the intention to make Halloween 2 as bloody and violent as the original film's imitators, which had used such conventions to ensure their success. When it was realized that Carpenter had no choice but to include these elements in the film, Wallace withdrew from the project. But he would get his way when he was offered and accepted the directing job for Halloween 3 Season of the Witch in 1982. And speaking of Halloween 3, the scene at the hospital in Halloween 2 with the mother and her son dressed as a pirate who had bitten into a piece of candy and the razor blade in it was actually originally supposed to be a first look at Carpenter and Hill's anthology idea that they had for the series and what would ultimately happen in Halloween 3 Season of the Witch.
So by all accounts, John Carpenter originally had no plans for a sequel to Halloween 1978, right? Like, it was supposed to be the first and only film that was, basically your babysitter murders idea. He kind of wanted this like Halloween anthology series, a different movie each time, but, you throw that title of Halloween. But, when money starts getting discussed, let's just say everyone has a price, right?
That is certainly true. We live in a society where the bottom line, despite our artistic preferences and principles, is the factor. Money is always going to come up and cloud the issue. As you said, Carpenter and Hill had a whole other plan for the series, but Carpenter kind of pulled a dick move and put himself in the spot as far as doing Halloween 2 with Michael Myers in it. But I will get into that in more detail in a minute. For now, I do find it interesting that Friday the 13th was originally supposed to be an anthology series based on the superstitions of the date, but went with continuing the story from the first film because it was so successful. Isn't that exactly what went down with Halloween as well? The success of the first film made a demand for the story to continue in the first film, despite Carpenter and Hill wanting to do an anthology series. It just baffles me how often those two franchises seem to influence each other. But that too is something I will get into more detail in a bit.
I wonder if this is something that we could ever actually get. Like Halloween, I think, if they wanted to now, they could kind of do this anthology series, especially with the way Halloween ended. And, I think Friday the 13th could kind of do it too. I mean, we have a Spider-Verse and a multiverse, in film. And, I don't know. I just don't see why folks couldn't handle something, a little different. But I do agree with you. Money really seems to kind of muck things up a lot of the time when it comes to this kind of artistic like expressions and things.
Definitely. And I actually like the idea of an anthology series, like a film length Tales from the Crypt kind of thing would be kind of fun.
Yeah.
I could get into a franchise like that, but my guess is that would be best suited for like an HBO or Showtime series rather than a film franchise. But honestly, if they wanted to do an anthology series, I would much rather it be done under a different name. I feel like the title gives a certain amount of expectation with it. For instance, I'm an old school Metallica fan, right? And when they came out with Load in 1996, I was let down to say the least. Not because it was a bad album necessarily, but because it had the Metallica name on it, but didn't sound anything like Metallica. I think I would feel the same way if they were films released like that, like with the Friday the 13th or Halloween names attached to them.
I definitely understand that viewpoint, and I do remember that 96 Load album, and it just wasn't any good. Sorry, if you're in the band and you come across this episode, I'm not trashing you guys. I'm not. It's just that album wasn't Metallica, right?
Right.
So, and this thing about Michael Myers, and Jason Voorhees, they're just so embedded, in our culture. And there has been that kind of this is a little kind of off kind of what we've talked about, a bit. But it's they've had that kind of thought about kind of making the Halloween franchise almost kind of like that kind of John Wick spinoff where they're kind of, they've got the movies and now they're kind of working on a show. I don't know. That kind of show idea may not be so bad to kind of explore those other avenues a bit. Just thinking off the top of my head.
Actually, come to think of it, as a perfect example of, and granted, this is just speculation because I don't actually know about the show totally. I don't think anybody does right now. But they're doing a Friday the 13th series. I think it's called Crystal Lake or something along those lines, right? And it looks like they're going to go back and do like Jason Voorhees as a kid, maybe get into the Pamela Voorhees thing. So, I mean, the idea that of using the franchise name like that to kind of explore other avenues of the franchise, I think that's a good idea, and I think that could potentially work.
Yes, I don't know, do you have a Haddonfield show or something, and you kind of explore some of these different aspects, so it's still within the same multiverse thing that we kind of established for ourselves last show, but you're telling these different stories. Maybe, I don't know, it could work. So Bloomhouse, you might want to call us. You might just want to give us a call. We've got ideas.
Nice. Yes, we definitely got ideas for you. Give us a call. But I think honestly, if they weren't going to do something like what we're talking about here with how you mentioned with the exploring the different avenues of the franchise rather than doing like an anthology thing, I think they would have to use a different name. I think under that. But let's get back to the film. Halloween 2 would actually be the first of 2 Halloween films directed by Rick Rosenthal, who loved the idea of Halloween 2 picking up right where the first film left off. He figured that if you like the first film, you will like the second one because it's a continuation of that same night from 1978. Rick Rosenthal would come back to helm Halloween Resurrections 21 years later in 2002. Just as a quick side note, most of the people portraying the hospital staff in Halloween 2 are actually students from Rick Rosenthal's acting class. Producer writer John Carpenter did not like Rosenthal's first version of the film, however, believing it to be as scary as an episode of Quincy MD from 1976. A re-edit was done, but Carpenter still found it to be too tame, so he took over the editing process and sped up the action. He also shot a few gory scenes over 3 nights of reshoots that were added into the film, despite Rosenthal's objections. This annoyed Rosenthal because he had wanted the sequel to emulate the way the original film avoided explicit violence and gore in favor of a well-crafted suspense and terror. In fact, Carpenter had intended Halloween 2 to do just that, but the success of the new wave of slasher films in 1979 and 1980 made him afraid that the movie was scary and R-rated, but lacked the bloodshed and nudity it needed to do well at the box office. And that led to the extra graphic material inclusions. Carpenter later said that he thought that Rosenthal didn't have a feeling for what was going on in the film. And I'm going to have to agree with that, as Halloween 2 clearly needed some work, and Halloween Resurrections from 2002, in my opinion, definitely dropped the ball. But that would not be the end of Carpenter's involvement in the franchise. When NBC wanted to run the original Halloween film on TV, they realized that it was not long enough, and Carpenter directed a shot of 12 minutes of added scenes to meet the required runtime. This version of the film is also available in the extended edition. As these extended scenes were filmed during the shooting of Halloween 2, their content involves establishing the connection between Laurie and Michael as siblings. My guess is that was to make it a better fit for the sequel.
I never made that connection with Rosenthal directing Halloween Resurrections and Halloween 2. And, I really think maybe some of my favorite film scenes were actually some of the ones that Carpenter actually put in, to be completely honest, because, the overall feel, while similar to 78, it's a little different. And you can just tell slightly different direction was kind of chosen. Regardless, though, you can certainly see how Michael ended in both 81 and 2002. And, yep, you can definitely tell how it was the same guy that directed it.
Yeah, there are definitely some similarities when you compare them side by side. I'm also going to have to agree with you about the Carpenter scenes. But not all of it was actually gore that he added. There was some stuff that he put in there just to make the story make a little bit more sense. Like the scene where Michael hears over the kid with the boombox radio that Laurie was taken to the hospital. That explains how he knew where to go, and that was not in the original cut of the film. Plus, I think adding the deaths of Alice and the security guard Garrett were good moves. In fact, Garrett getting the claw of that hammer into his skull was a sweet kill. With all due respect to the original's minimalistic and goreless approach, I liked that Halloween stepped up to the plate with the others as far as the gore goes. I feel like they were able to maintain a minimalist style approach, though, even with the addition of the gore, like Alice's death. She took a knife to the throat. That could have very easily been a very bloody scene. Just right, yeah. Like Evil Dead 2 shit going on, right? but there was just a quick little spurt of blood. It was like Halloween saying, "You want gore? Fine, but we're gonna do it our way."
That was a good kill. And, Mr. Garrett kind of getting the hammer to the head was also just a great kill. And it almost kind of adds insult to injury, especially after getting attacked by the cat, And, but I really do how like they took the minimalist approach with it. Like you get some gore through the movie, like the scene with Nurse Alves being drained of blood. But probably the most uncomfortable one was the needle to the eyeball. But I digress. We'll get into all that.
Yeah, we will. We will. And you also make a good point with we'll go with Alves kill. It seems like one of the classic things about Halloween is the aftermath shots. Other franchises show aftermath shots, but it's not often with the same flair as the Halloween movies. Like I guess the first one that comes to mind is from Halloween 2018, when we see that the clerk at the gas station looked like he got curb stomped onto the counter. That was a bitchin' fucking aftermath shot. I mean,
oh
wow,
my gosh, it
felt the
was
intensity of that, and all you saw was what was left over. But
my jaw hurts just thinking about that. So just seeing that, like, it's just brutal, but it was awesome.
See, and I think they did something similar there with that nurse Al's death. While there was a lot of blood in that death, it still left a lot to the theater of the mind, something that was really important to Mustafa Akkad. And also, I liked the bit with the cat attacking Garrett before the kill. It dropped our expectations of the kill and then smacked us right across the head with it. It was a nice way to subvert the expectations. But as you say, we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves here. We'll talk a bit more about this stuff when we count the bodies. So let's get back to the film.
That's probably a good idea because we could honestly just do this show and just talk about the kills all day. So let's just let's go and get back to Halloween 2, Mike.
Sure thing, James. The creators of Friday the 13th, Victor Miller and Sean S. Cunningham, have flat out said that they were ripping off Halloween from 1978 with their 1980 film, which was a huge influence on the level of gore and violence that permeated the slasher genre during the golden age of slashers from 1978 to 1984. But it would seem that Halloween 2 was influenced by Friday the 13th as it turned up the gore and violence in part 2. But there's more. The Shape has some degree of super strength in Halloween 2 as he's able to beat through one of those heavy hospital doors. Those things are hard to open, much less beat through.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Granted, it was 5 years later in 1986, but Jason Voorhees acquired super strength in Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, when he became what is known as Zombie Jason. But I have to think that it was an influence on Tom McLaughlin, who wrote Jason Lives. But the super strength of Michael would be turned up in 1988's Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. Michael wasn't just strong, he was using his strength to kill people, like pinning Kelly Meeker to the wall by running her through with a shotgun barrel, or ripping apart Deputy Pierce and those other two officers. Oddly enough, Michael runs in Halloween 4, and only in Halloween 4, I might add. But running was also something that Jason did originally before Part 6. I think that like the super strength was an influence added later, so too was Michael running like Jason. Halloween 2 is the first of 4 movies in the franchise that begin with the end of the previous film. Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers, picked up where Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, left off. Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 picked up where his 2007 reboot ended. And last but not least, Halloween Kills from 2021 picks up where the 2018 film left off, and even where the 1978 Halloween film left off. I would like to point out that Friday the 13th Part 3 from 1982 starts out with the end of Part 2 from 1981, and Part 4, the final chapter, starts out with the end of Part 3, as well as flashbacks from Part 1 and 2. So it seems that there are either some amazing coincidences going on there, or that was possibly a mutual influence going on there as well. But these are all just my personal theories, and I have rambled on about this rabbit hole for several minutes now. Why don't we get back to it? Unless you had something you wanted to say first, James.
I'm honestly just kind of wondering, how deep did does this rabbit hole go? like, we've talked about this before, but it's like each of these films kind of plays off what the other one did before it. Like Jason ripped off Michael, Freddy ripped off both of them and added knives for fingers. But Michael ripped off Psycho and other movies. Like, we could go back at least to like the Universal horror classics to find some like inspiration with those as well. And I love that. It's kind of like, in comics with like DC and Marvel, right? You had Flash in one, you have Silver in the other, Green Arrow in DC, and you have Hawkeye and Marvel. You just keep using that exact same character, but with, a new outfit, and you call them something else, right? And it it honestly feels like they're playing some form of poker with this. I see you giving us a serial killer who doesn't talk and wears a funny mask. I'll give you one that wears a hockey mask and uses an axe. Okay. And I'll also make him super strong. Okay, I'll see you his strength and raise you that he's the brother. Like, it's just insane.
That is some funny shit. It certainly does seem like there was some horror movie poker going on there. That might just be the best way to describe that exchange between those two franchises. But let's get back to some more behind the scenes stuff. John Carpenter felt at the time that the studio had not paid him a fair amount of money for writing and directing the original movie, considering that it had been so profitable. When the studio offered him more money to write the sequel, Carpenter accepted the job as well as a producer's credit so that he could earn back what he believes was his owed pay, although he admittedly received a significant back-end salary for the 1978 Halloween film later as well. Besides all of that, there was the aforementioned dick move on Carpenter's half I talked about before. Check this out. When Irwin Yablin approached John Carpenter about doing Halloween 2, Carpenter told Yablin that he wanted to do The Fog with him first. Irwin Yablins agreed as long as they did Halloween 2 next, and Carpenter agreed with that. Yablins then went to the Cannes Film Festival and was sitting next to an old acquaintance on the plane named Bob Ramey, who was then in charge of Avco Embassy Films. They got to talking, and John Carpenter was brought up, and Yablins mentioned that he and Carpenter were going to do The Fog and then the Halloween 2 after that. Not long after this conversation, Bob Ramey announced at the film festival, to Irwin Yablin's surprise and horror, that he was doing The Fog with John Carpenter. Yablins was pissed, and he called Carpenter, and in Yablin's words, he got nowhere with Carpenter. In response, Yablins did the only thing that he felt he could do at the time, and he sued both Ramey and Carpenter. To settle the case, they agreed to let Carpenter do The Fog with Avco Embassy Films first, but he must agree to write and produce Halloween 2, and that's what I mean by his own dick move kind of got him stuck in this situation.
In the civil justice system, you have two options: sue or be sued. When The Fog rolled over Halloween. Dun, dun.
Yeah, it seems like disputes like this go on all the time in business. I was kind of actually surprised to see just how much litigation goes on behind the scenes of Hollywood. It's a wonder anything goes down at all. Speaking of which, due to lack of ideas, the script was not coming out as well as Carpenter had thought it would. Carpenter has personally stated that the only thing helping him through the writing process of Halloween 2 was a six-pack of Budweiser every day, which he believes led to an inferior script and bad choices in the movie story. But it might have been the crappy beer as well. Halloween 2 was originally set to take place in a high-rise apartment building. In later script meetings, however, it was changed to the Haddonfield Memorial Hospital. Either way, Carpenter later called Halloween 2 an abomination and a horrible story.
Okay, so does this prove the point that Donald Pleasance was better at his job than John Carpenter was at his. Because I mean, we talked about in Halloween 78 that Pleasance drank 2 bottles of wine right before filming that opening scene. And man, did he just nail it, like right out of the gate. And John Carpenter wimps out on a 6-pack of bad beer. I mean, with all due respect, though, I've heard it said that Carpenter really did have a rough time with the script because, he never intended for that sequel, but the studio said, let's do one. So he just kept banging his head against the wall and said, okay, let's just have Laurie be the sister because I don't know what else to do. I give up, but gets us past this part and we can just finish the story and be done with it.
Oh, man. Donald Pleasance was an amazing actor. Everyone I have ever heard talk about working with him says that there was no need for multiple takes, that Pleasance could show up without rehearsal and do it perfectly from take one. He not only knew his lines, but everyone else's too. And as you mentioned, he can do all of that on 2 bottles of wine. So at the very least, Donald can hold his liquor and perform, and apparently Carpenter cannot. What I think the issue really was, however, was what you mentioned. Carpenter just didn't have any ideas. Writer's block was Carpenter's problem, and there I think the beard just didn't help, but was not really what was holding him back. I think really it just kind of cut back some of the filtering process that he might have used if he was sober.
Like it could have been so close for John Carpenter to basically be like, the equivalent of like a movie one-hit wonder when it comes to like Halloween 2, right? But at least he was able to kind of pull something together that in its own way worked, and it's lasted because it went to like the return of Michael Myers and all this stuff. And I mean, geez, we had 22 years of stories just about, well, even more than that if you count the Rob Zombie movie. So more like 30 years of stories like within that way. And so, it's just lasted. But it almost kind of sounds like John Carpenter was kind of like, you're a college student and you have something to do the next day that you put off for way too long. And it just turned out that you actually did a pretty good job on it. A little bit of an odd bit of like positive reinforcement with that,
Yeah, that's got to be a rarity. I personally don't work all that well under pressure, but those times when you're feeling the squeeze and you're able to deliver feel really good, I got to admit. There are certainly times that folks have liked a song I wrote or a story I wrote, and I just was not happy with it, though. And it seems like that's where Carpenter ended up with his feelings on Halloween 2. But as you mentioned, I also liked Halloween 2, and it is one of my favorites in the franchise.
Oh yeah, and absolutely. When it comes to working under like a lot of pressure and you get to that tight squeeze, it's kind of like a crapshoot. It's like sometimes you just have to pull something out of your ass. But in this situation, like it worked, and it gave us this, this entire Halloween franchise with even more stories after that we just absolutely love.
Oh, it did. It really did. And it seemed to work despite Carpenter's objections. If we could get back into the film itself a little bit, Deborah Hill brought up some interesting things here. In an interview with Fangoria magazine, Deborah Hill said that they were at least considering making Halloween 2 a 3D movie. They investigated a number of 3D processes and found that they were all way too expensive for Halloween 2. She went on to say that most of the projects they did involved a lot of night shooting, evil lurks at night kind of thing. And that is really hard to do with 3D, at least at the time. but I have to disagree with that. Friday the 13th, they did their third movie in 3D in 1982, and it had a lot of night shots in it. Matter of fact, most of the shots were night shots. So I'm not really sure what she's talking about with that last statement there, but I do believe it was too expensive.
Evil dies tonight. Oops, sorry, wrong film, wrong universe. You just had that evil lurks at night thing. I just had to go for it, man. I had to. I do get that it had to be, kind of expensive, and I kind of wonder if they really knew how to pull it off. Like how some people say, yeah, I can fix that, or yeah, I can do that, and then they kind of get the job and they absolutely have no clue what they're doing. So I just kind of wonder about that. Or was it more like, I just don't really want to bother with it? Do you think that maybe Carpenter and Hill were just like over it? Like, who cares? We don't really want to make this movie, but we're getting paid. So let's just kind of half-ass this thing and just go on about our lives.
Well, considering that Carpenter apparently had to be forced into doing it, I'm sure there was probably some of that going on. But 3D movies were really making a comeback between 1981 and 1983, and were widely popular. I mean, Parasite and Friday the 13th Part 3, which were both obviously in 3D, came out the next year in 1982. Jaws 3D and Amityville 3D came out the year after that in 1983, and that's just the horror movies that came out in 3D at that time. I have to believe that Hill must have been aware of that, and that is probably why she was considering it to begin with. My guess is that the potential income in making a 3D film at that point was pretty big, as it would have put Halloween on the map as one of the first horror movies to do it in the resurgence of the tech. So I tend to believe that it had to be a budgetary concern.
I can definitely get that being that kind of budgetary concern, especially with, the first movie basically having that kind of shoestring budget that they had, but it would have been kind of awesome with that. And, I remember in the late 2000s, we had another kind of 3D resurgence there. I went to see Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince in 3D. And I think it was like, what was it, like 2008, 2009? And, the first few minutes of the movie was done completely 3D, and that was it. So, no action sequences or anything cool like that. It was just the kind of introductory point, and then boom, it's over, it's done. I never saw another 3D movie after that. But, I would be interested to see a Halloween movie in 3D. That might be pretty cool.
Damn, dude. I would be pissed about that too, especially in a Harry Potter movie. That's you want to see like all this action and stuff jumping out of the screen there. So damn. I hopped onto that 3D craze as well around that same time. I went to the theater to see My Bloody Valentine in 3D in 2009 and saw Seven, the final chapter. Is any horror movie titled The Final Chapter ever the final chapter? But anyway, I saw that in 2002, and honestly, I'm not a huge fan of the 3D thing myself, although I did not get burned with it like you did. I could certainly see how that would sour you on the idea, but 3D feels like much ado about nothing to me, aside from the occasional cool shot. But I would certainly watch a 3D Halloween film.
I just don't want to get too worked up over this, Mike. So let's go and jump back into H2 and kind of who starred in it.
That sounds like a good idea, James. Halloween 2 stars Jamie Lee Curtis as Laurie Strode, and I actually have a totally random observation here. It jumped out at me that her name is Jamie Lee Curtis. Her parents were Janet Lee and Tony Curtis. Granted, Lee is spelled differently in Janet Lee. It's the Irish spelling. But phonetically, they are the same, and Jamie took her father's last name. I can't find anything to verify if her name is a play on that, rather than to use the hyphenated name. But it was just something I noticed. Since
I have
Jamie
no
Lee
idea.
Curtis, yeah, doesn't it sound like it though? Jamie Lee Curtis, Janet Leigh, Tony Curtis. It
Yeah, it really sounds like that. So, I'm wondering if they're like, you know what, we can just kind of give her the middle name Lee and just kind of just go with that, and we'll spell it a little differently, but it sounds the same. So I could see that happening, but I don't know. Like, I'd love to be able to kind of ask her about that and see if she knows. Like, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, that's definitely one of my questions for her if I ever get to meet her.
Yes.
Yeah.
Want to know that.
So, since Jamie Lee Curtis had started wearing a much shorter hairstyle by the time they started filming Halloween 2 than she had in the first film, and consequently, as the film takes place on that same night, she had to wear a wig to match her old haircut. And God, did that wig suck? Is that just me?
Oh, you can definitely tell in some of those scenes that she's got a wig.
Yeah.
Like, especially kind of like at the end when she's in the elevator trying to escape, Michael and all that. Like, you can definitely tell there's something going on with her hair. So it's definitely a wig.
Right. Right. So, one last thing about Jamie Lee Curtis before I move on to the rest of the cast. Halloween 1978 and Halloween 2, along with Carpenter's The Fog, Prom Night, and Terror Train, all from 1980, and Road Games from 1981, are the films that gave Jamie Lee Curtis her Scream Queen name. So,
She did a lot of films there in just like a few years, like back to back. Like, she was always working.
but if we get to the other actors now, Donald Pleasance comes back to play Dr. Sam Loomis, but just a bit differently. In the first film, he used an American accent. Donald Pleasance spoke in his normal British accent in Halloween 2, however. Halloween 2 would be the last film that Donald Pleasance and Jamie Lee Curtis would work in together. Charles Cyphers, or Chuck Cyphers as he likes to go by, comes back as Sheriff Lee Brackett, Leo Rossi as EMT Bud Scarlotti, and Last Starfighter star Lance Guest plays his partner Jimmy. As a quick side note, The Last Starfighter was directed by none other than Nick Castle, who played the Shape in the first film.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Pamela
I had
Susan
no
Shue.
idea.
Yeah, and I love Last Starfighter. It's a great movie.
Yeah.
Pamela Susan Shoop played Nurse Karen Bailey. Hunter Von Leer played Deputy Gary Hunt. Nancy Stevens as played Marion Chambers, and Gloria Gifford played Nurse Virginia Alves. I'm just gonna say that with that tone every time because I think it's weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
But let me take a moment to tell you about this talented and knowledgeable woman. Gloria Gifford knows so much about acting, directing, writing, and producing. She has taught the subject at the American Film Institute for 6 years and opened the prestigious Actors Academy Milano in Milan, Italy in 2007, where she taught Italian actors and actresses and international models in intensive acting programs. I don't know about you, but I am impressed as hell with all of that. So Tawny Moyer played Nurse Jill Franco, and here's something interesting about hers and Nurse Virginia Alves' character and the actresses who played them. Nurse Virginia Alves is named after production designer Joe Alves, and Jill Franco is named after producer Larry Franco, and both of them worked on John Carpenter's Escape from New York in 1981.
I had no idea about that with Gloria Gifford, but man, that's incredible.
Yeah.
I'm really impressed by that. You don't always think about these people that are like the side characters, really doing anything much, maybe beyond that one movie or maybe a couple. But, you kind of see things like that in sports, right? Like in football, those who really have to work hard and learn the game because they're not very good, or, they're not a household name like Tom Brady or Jimmy G. And, they're just learning everything that they possibly can about the sport and every position, not even just, the one that they play, right? These are the guys that typically make the best coaches afterwards because they have to use their minds as much as they use their body to understand the game. So, I'm wondering if that was kind of like Gifford's approach. Like, I'm not exactly sure what her IMDb page says, but that's just so impressive that she just knows so much about acting that she went on to do like something amazing and just kind of train other actors. There's something about that I just really love.
Yeah.
And, going back to Pleasance, he's like, I wonder if he's like, okay, I'm done with this franchise now, it's over, it's done with. Can I just be me? Or do you think it was more because he was a doctor, and Americans, like we have this tendency to know that there's like with the different with like folks with like a British accent, it's being more of like a high class accent. I say that I know there are different accents even in Britain, and some there are even considered more like hickish than others or something like that, but we just don't pick up on it over here in the States.
Yeah.
Like, which one do you think that is, Mike? Or do you have another idea about that with his accent switching back to British?
Well, when Mustafa Akkad asked Pleasance how many more Halloween films he was planning to do, Pleasance replied, "I'll stop at 22." and he did his damnedest to do it too. I mean, Pleasance was in 5 Halloween movies between 1978 and 1995, but alas, he died, and that's why both The Curse of Michael Myers and Halloween H2O 20 years later were dedicated to him. So no, I don't think he was done with the franchise, but I do have a different theory. I looked it up, and the character, Dr. Samuel Loomis, is British. So maybe he dropped the accent just to be more true to character.
I do know that Pleasance really wanted to do as many as he could, but the time that Halloween 2 was filming, if everyone kind of just thought it was over with and done. So, I don't know at the time, but it's a really interesting thing about the thing with that switch and then you kind of digging deeper there and seeing that Dr. Loomis is actually supposed to be British. So that just definitely kind of adds that extra layer there to his character.
It does. It is interesting, and honestly, it makes me wonder why there was an American accent to begin with. I can't find anything on why exactly it went down like that. Listeners, if you have some secret knowledge as to why this accent change happened, or why there was an American accent to begin with on a British character, we would love to hear about it. But for now, let's get into the Shape. Nick Castle could not reprise his role as the Shape because he was busy starting his directing career. He was replaced by Dick Warlock, who has developed a strong following among fans, along with Castle, actually. As I understand it, he signs his autograph at conventions with Michael Myers H2. I thought that was a little weird. If you were going to show that to somebody, like, look, I got Dick Warlock's autograph and it just says Michael Myers H2, and you're like, that doesn't say Dick Warlock, but you know what I mean. Yeah. Warlock is also one of 2 actors to play Michael Myers to have a website, with the other one being George P. Wilbur, who played the Shape in Halloween 4 and Halloween 6.
I didn't know that about how Dick Warlock kind of signed, his name with Michael Myers H2. But, that's really neat. And, I really would love to kind of get to meet up with these folks. Just never had the opportunity. And, a few years ago, I was presenting at a con, and I kept missing the now late, great Kevin Conroy, who famously voiced Batman in Batman the Animated Series, among other kind of Batman projects. And his Batman just meant the world to me growing up and still does to this day. And you know, these folks that played Michael and Jamie Lee, you know, and the late Donald Pleasance have just made such a personal impact on me that I at least like to be able to tell them how much that actually meant to me before it's too late.
Oh man, that breaks my heart that you miss Kevin Conroy like that.
We just kept missing each other. Like, you know, I was either like doing my part, or you know, or like he had a part, or he was out to lunch or something. I like I was able to buy, like, you know, a signed print from his table at least, because he had someone there kind of manning it. But I didn't actually get to, you know, just tell him that. And you know, I would have been one of like millions of people, like, you know, I'm sure that he, like, you know, he met in the last 30 years, all kind of saying the same thing. But, you know, it's just something, you know, really neat to be able to tell someone who kind of had that, you know, impact on you, hey, your work actually really means a lot to me. And thank you for that. It's just, you know, one of those kind of human connection things that you can make with people.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You know, I know that there are a few conventions I have on my bucket list. And a horror convention is definitely one of them. Being able to meet them and talk to them and get my movies autographed. I mean, that would just be awesome.
You know, I think it's time that we definitely need to start like doing some of these like horror conventions and things together. That'd be so cool. You know,
hell yeah.
And you know, I live in the middle of nowhere, Kentucky, so it gets a little harder to do those. But it's like, you know, I'm pretty quick to, like, you know, an airport, so it's like I could at least get there, but need to get on that ASAP.
So back to Dick Warlock, who was 41 when he played the 21-year-old Michael Myers. Warlock actually met Carpenter on the set of Escape from New York in 1981 when he was a stunt doubling for Kurt Russell, and he was in the office talking about doing another movie. Apparently, after the meeting, he was passing. He was walking down the hallway and he passed a room with a Michael Myers mask just sitting on a desk. He picked it up and put it on and went into Rosenthal's office and just stood there staring at him like. And Rosenthal was like, "Who are you?" And he didn't say anything. He just stood there staring at him. And so he was like, he finally started getting agitated. He said, "Who the hell are you?" So Warlock took off the mask and they talked for a minute. And Warlock asked if there was any reason he couldn't play the role of Michael in the film. And Rosenthal said that as long as Deborah Hill didn't have an issue with it, there was no reason that he couldn't do it, and they hired him. So that is kind of cool.
What is it with people getting jobs in this franchise, man? Like, some rando just walks by, steals a mask, and walks into like the director's office, you know, and just stares. You know, I love that. You know, really give some like solid credence to like Sheriff Brackett's line in the 1978 film. You know, all they stole were some Halloween mask, ropes, and a couple of knives.
That is pretty crazy. I certainly would not have been so bold if it were me. I wouldn't have just walked in and said, "Ooh, the Michael Myers mask," you know. I mean, but you'll note that he played Michael Myers and I did not. So, you know. They say that luck is actually preparation meeting opportunity, and the trick is to take it when it happens. It seems like that is exactly what Dick Warlock did. But check out this little story. Warlock said that Deborah Hill was on set throughout the shoot, including his stalking scenes. At one point, he even asked her about his slow walk, and she replied, "It's fine, keep doing that." But after the release of the film, Hill said in an interview that Warlock walked too slow and that he didn't resemble Castle's portrayal. This angered Warlock immensely, and understandably so, as he felt while present during the set, she could have voiced her opinion and he could have altered how he was walking. And I have to agree with him. I mean, that was a total dick move on Deborah Hill's part.
So, I mean, if Dick Warlock asked, okay, how's this? And they're like, yeah, that's fine. Just keep doing that. Then what's the big deal? You know, if you see something wrong, say something because you can kind of adjust. You know, that's it. Don't throw him under the bus afterwards. Like, you know, I've even seen that with jobs I've had. You know, it's like, you know, if you don't like what I've done, like, tell me before doing like the exit interview. It's like, I'm flexible. If you don't like it, that's kind of your job to tell me. And you tell me exactly what you want me to do. And Deborah Hill could have done that for Dick Warlock.
Oh, 100%. And as a side note, I just realized you can't say it was a dick move on Deborah Hill's part when we're talking about Dick Warlock.
You know what? That's true. We got to find some other line to use there.
Yeah, so we'll ignore that last line. So it was, I have to agree though, it was absolutely the director's job to tell him if he wasn't doing it correctly, and it was also Hill's job to say something to Rosenthal or Warlock about it if that was how she felt. Not only did she not do her job properly, she stabbed the actor in the back and tried to make it his fault. I have to say that makes me like her a little less.
You know, it kind of makes me like her a little less too. Like, you know, there's honestly, like, I've said this a few times, you know, today. It's like, it seems like most of them were just there collecting a paycheck like half the time, right? You know, it's like, you know, but maybe the walk could have looked a little differently, like on set compared to what we got in the film. You know, I'm kind of willing to give her the slight benefit of a doubt with that, but you know, they could have run back through the film like before they released it and kind of did some edits and things like that. You know, it just, I don't know, seems a little weird to me.
Oh, they definitely could have watched it on film either at the end of that day or at the beginning of the next day when the director watched the dailies. That's just part of making a movie. Nothing goes to the editor without first being screened by the director and even producers sometimes. So, I mean, I really don't think she has any excuse there.
She definitely doesn't. Not this time.
But this rant has gone on for long enough. So apparently there is some dispute about whether or not the mask used in Halloween 2 was in fact the same mask from the 1978 film. Well, my fellow horror lovers, your friend Mike did some research for you, and I'll tell you what I have uncovered. During the filming of the first movie, Nick Castle kept the mask in his back pocket, so the spray paint wore off rather quickly. This, along with dust and Deborah Hill's cigarette smoke, contributed to the discoloration of the mask over time, which is why people think that this sequel uses a different mask. Another thing that contributed to this theory that it is a different mask is that it appears wider on Dick Warlock. But the reason is that Warlock is shorter and stockier than Castle, and the mask just fit him differently. It should be noted that the stunt mask Tony Moran and Jim Winburn used is different from the Nick Castle hero mask. However, it is the stunt mask, not the hero mask, that Nick Castle had on display at his house and Deborah Hill borrowed but never gave back. Granted, she never gave it back because it was because the stunt mask was what you see burning away at the end of the film. So the mask was destroyed. The stunt mask from the first movie was also used in the final scene after Michael is shot in the eyes. The fact that it was the stunt mask and not the hero mask is proven by Dick Warlock being given the hero mask, scalpel, boots, jumpsuit, and knife used in the film because they believed Halloween 2 would be the last film in the franchise. Warlock kept all that stuff for 22 years until he sold it to a haunted house owner in Ohio in 2003. When the studio decided to revive Michael Myers in part 4, they regretted having given away all that stuff to Warlock, and they never again gave out another prop. That's also why subsequent sequels use different masks.
I had no idea about that, but that's super cool. Like, this reminds me of when Ryan Reynolds famously kind of stole the Deadpool costume after, the first Deadpool film. He's like, this is mine and I'm taking it with me. Granted, Warlock just kind of got to keep it. And, I don't really blame him for selling it afterwards. But, if the studio had wanted to, they could have called him up and made him a Godfather offer on that part.
Actually, I didn't know that about Ryan Reynolds keeping the Deadpool costume, but that's pretty cool. But actually, there is a Halloween story like that Ryan Reynolds Deadpool one. Don Sharks, who is a huge muscular guy. If you ever see him, he is a very imposing figure. And he played Michael Myers in Halloween 5. He apparently said he was just keeping the mask when they asked for it. His exact words when they asked for the mask was, "Nope, game ball, I'm keeping it." And no one was big enough to take it from him. As for the studio, I have to agree with that. I mean, I don't know Dick Warlock or the studio executives, but it seems like that probably could have been resolved with a phone call, like you said. I honestly have no idea if that happened or not, but it seems like a pretty obvious move. So I have one last.
Well,
Sorry, go ahead.
They could have gone like the whole like Godfather thing on it, right? I'll make you an offer that you can't refuse, right? And just give him the money that he'd want to like get that back if he wanted the original mask, right? Like that's it.
Right. That wouldn't have been that difficult, I don't think. No. So one last thing about the mask I want to talk about before we move on. In order to do the scene where the blood pours out of Michael's eye holes in the mask, there was a bulb of fake blood put into the interior forehead of Michael Myers. But Warlock himself says that he actually had like a little bulb, like something you would see like on like a blood pressure cuff or something, that actually released the blood.
Oh wow. Like, nowadays it feels like, on your kind of bigger films, that's all done with like CGI now. But something really has to be said for those like quote unquote like old fashioned stunt things, right? Just something so simple as like that little like packet of blood kind of being like up there was just executed flawlessly. And now that we kind of mention it, I wonder like, do they flavor that kind of fake blood at all if you're going to get it like around your face? Like, does it taste good in case it gets into your mouth? Like, I don't know, red velvet cake or something?
Red velvet cake. That's an interesting flavor.
It's just like the first red thing that kind of popped into my mind. Like, I don't know, it could taste like chocolate covered cherries or strawberry milk or something, just something where it kind of helps the actors a little bit.
Well, I'm just picturing if they made blood on set that tasted like red velvet cake, I'd be busted in back taking a drink of that shit. But
oh Lord, I think we all would just be like, okay, we're not taking, and just like really try to get some in, right? Like I can see that.
So, actually, though, I could tell you from interviews I've seen with Tom Savini, the special effects artist that worked on Dawn of the Dead from 1978 and Friday the 13th from 1980, that Savini definitely didn't flavor it. He used 3M brand stage blood in Dawn of the Dead, and Savini and Stravakis used a blend of Cairo syrup, red food coloring, and most surprisingly, Kodak photo flow in Friday the 13th. In the 1979 movie Alien, they used formaldehyde. So to answer your question, no, I don't think they flavor it. The closest to something edible that I know of that they used was corn syrup. They used for blood in Psycho from 1960. I think they used it in Scream as well and other modern movies. But as a general rule, one should probably avoid getting anything in their mouths or other open areas during filming.
Formaldehyde, that's got a strong odor, and honestly, I'm going to have to look this up, and I'm going to do it right quick. Kodak photo flow. What the hell is that? Oh my goodness. It's a wetting agent used to minimize watermarks or streak during film development. It's used after the final wash when processing film to decrease the water surface tension and promote faster uniform drying. So it doesn't even sound like it's supposed to maybe be ingested at all.
I don't think so.
Yeah. So I'm thinking it's probably best just to keep your mouth closed during that part. And you think kind of over the years, like things would change a little bit, but you don't really think about things like that, like in a movie or a show. It's like, it's a lot harder work than what we think of it just looking from the outside in. Certainly a big safety issue in that regard.
Oh, you are so right. There is so much more to filmmaking than I had any idea about just 5 or 6 years ago. And I'm amazed at how many injuries happen while filming. Safety is definitely more of a factor than I realized. In my head, it was all totally safe. But the fact is that the shot demands more sometimes. And I think that's why it is so cool that Dick Warlock made sure that everyone was safe during the filming of the death scenes. For example, during Leo Rossi's death scene, where he was strangled from behind, Warlock told Rossi to arch his back and arms further as he gave 4 tugs, telling Rossi to go limp after the 4th tug, and Warlock could cushion the fall.
From everything that I've read about these films, like the actor that played Michael really went above and beyond to ensure the safety of everyone involved. And, I'm sure we'll talk about that a little more in like Halloween 4 and 5, especially when you kind of introduce, a small kid into it too. Because if you're quote unquote killing someone in a movie, they could very well get hurt. So it seems like, Dick was just a nice guy, and it's like he really wanted to keep people safe and let them kind of continue on doing their job.
Just as a quick side note, there is a scene in Friday the 13th where a girl is going to get stabbed in the temple with an ice pick. Just to give you an idea of how unsafe these things are, apparently when they first shot that scene, a retractable ice pick was not what was used. So she actually had to film the rest of that scene with a hole in her head right there. When he went to stab her, it actually poked her. Yeah. So
that hurts just thinking about it.
Right. So Dick being really careful about that stuff was very cool. And Warlock seems like a pretty cool guy from what I've heard from the actors that has worked with him and from what I've seen of him in interviews. And you are absolutely right about safety being a major concern when you're talking about violence on screen, but especially if you're talking about murder on screen. But I think we've gone a bit off topic here. So let's talk about the novelization of Halloween 2 for a minute. Interestingly enough, several of the lines from Halloween 2 were taken from the novelization of the 78 film that was released in 79. The most obvious references are the neighbor appearing from a house near the Doyle residence and talking to Loomis. Their exchange is almost identical and includes the Loomis line, "You don't know what death is." Also, Loomis goes outside with Laurie to view Michael after shooting him. Loomis also says that his gun heightens his sense of security, which is a line said to Deputy Hunt in Halloween 2 when they pull up to the Myers house. But when it comes to the novelizations, we got to turn to my man James here. What can you tell us about the novelization, James?
Is this some kind of joke? I've been trick or treated to death tonight. You don't know what death is. Cue spooky music. I just love that scene. And that's the first scene in this movie that lives absolutely rent-free in my head. When someone says anything about, being done to death, like I think about that line, and I really think from now on, I'm just going to start saying, "You don't know what death is," and just get really wide-eyed and just turn around and just run away very quickly.
You know, why not? You know, I just typically say the line anyway. I mean, hell, at least we think it's funny, right? but seriously, back to the novel.
Okay, so the novel is really interesting for this one because the movie and the novel is actually very similar with this one, but there's definitely a few differences I want to point out really quick. So that kind of like not exactly opening scene, but like really early scene with Mr. and Miss Elrond, who, by the way, the name like Elrond is mentioned in Halloween 18 when Oscar is trespassing. So it's a descendant, I'm guessing. But anyway, I kind of digress there. But in the novel, Miss Elrond entertains trick-or-treaters at her house. She tells them that she made sugar cookies, but Mr. Elrond had eaten them all. So she gave them coins to go buy something instead. So instead of asking Mr. Elrond the question that never got answered, like, you know, I still want to know, did he want mayonnaise or mustard on that damn ham sandwich? Like, I need to know. Because, so, like, in the book, he gets blamed for eating all the sugar cookies for the kids. Like, you know, I just got to say, you know, if my wife's going to go through and make, like all these cookies for kids, I'm going to get my fair share of them. Like, kids, like, you got to step up. These are mine, right? but you know, honestly, how the neighbor girl, Alice, says in the movie that Miss Elrod is always picking on him, and he got tired of it and started beating on her very nonchalantly, I might add. I guess in the book, he gets blamed for a lot of things in their relationship.
You know, my take was totally different on that. Actually, I took that as her saying he was beating his wife, and she basically asked for it, so it's no big deal. I have to say that bit probably doesn't go over as well with modern audiences, but back to the novel.
You know, exactly. And, you know, every time I've kind of watched the movie kind of up to this point, you know, I kind of had that same idea. Like, oh my gosh, someone was saying that she was kind of asking for it and it wasn't a big deal. And, you know, but maybe that little extra part in the novel, like, you know, if he's constantly getting blamed for things, maybe that would make sense for Alice to kind of think that, you know what, maybe they're just fed up. He's done with just being blamed and stuff, you know, and all that. So he just began to smack her around some. You know, still, you couldn't get away with that in like the modern times and stuff, especially. And, you know, sometimes it is kind of hard to watch movies that are older because we have this kind of like modern viewpoint because, you know, culturally, I mean, we've changed a lot in 40 plus years.
Oh, hell yeah. There have been a lot of changes in the last decade, let alone the last 40 years. But I imagine looking back that previous generations have felt the same. There is a reason that the generational gap is a phrase. And that scene with Alice certainly stands out as one of those scenes.
Yes, exactly. Like, you couldn't get away with it like in the 2018 movie about, or any movie kind of making that as a slight joke, even if that's the way she been it. So that big kind of like generational gap is definitely a thing. Okay, so going on with Mr. and Miss Elrod, when that news report comes on TV, Miss Elrod states, "It's that Myers boy again. I knew it." And she said this in the book because she didn't say it in the movie. Unbeknownst to her, Michael is standing right behind her and steals her knife and then exits through that back door, which this does make me wonder. And I would like to know your thoughts on this, Mike. We know that Michael doesn't kill babies because we saw that in 2018 and a couple of the other movies. But he doesn't really kill like the old people in this one either. He just kind of takes the knife and leaves. So why do you think he doesn't?
I do not know why he chose not to kill them when he did choose to kill others. The best answer I can give is that what motivates Michael to kill seems to change in each timeline. So perhaps that is why there is a difference in times he would kill and times he was not. But that is very thin at best. I honestly wondered why he didn't kill them myself. I mean, they were right there. Unless, of course, Michael just really appreciates a good sandwich and didn't want to get blood on him.
You know what? Exactly, right? Even Michael Myers needs to eat, which, which kind of makes me think, just kind of going through this, it's the second time that a ham sandwich has shown up in the movies that we've talked about so far. Because in Halloween 2018, the woman in the rollers that Michael Myers kills with a hammer in the kitchen, and we see it off screen, she was actually making a ham sandwich for herself in that novel. So just that nice little like tying back to the other films there. I just thought I'd kind of like mention in because she actually had to take the ham out and cut it the same way that Miss Elrod did in this movie. Okay, so going back to H2, a scene that didn't make the cut but remained in the novel was a conversation in the hospital between Dr. Mixture and Miss Alves, since we're kind of going with that tone, where he asked her if Janet's tried calling Laurie's parents. Miss Alves tells him that she's on break, and Dr. Mixture then states that there are no breaks tonight, and then recalls that they were at the same party he was at and that they're probably still there. So I think that kind of helps my theory that the Strodes are passed out drunk somewhere trying to sleep it off.
That certainly does. And while that is shitty parenting, it's somehow better than they didn't care enough to bother.
That's very true. Either they're lousy parents and don't care, or they're passed out drunk somewhere trying to sleep it off, or maybe they were murdered like off screen, off book, who knows. Very doubtful on that last one, but you really have to wonder, if they didn't have to sleep off a hangover somewhere while they weren't at the hospital trying to check in on their daughter, all of this stuff. But I digress. So later in the town square where Michael walks in the movie, he's described as being there in Deborah's car, wearing a black coat and hiding in the shadows. Meanwhile, Nurse Karen has her scene with Darcy, where she realizes she's late for work and still has to drive her home. As she speeds away, the boombox boy then walks through the square and bumps into Michael, who emerged from the car. However, instead of playing the news, his boombox were playing Mr. Sandman. Michael then walks to the hospital from there. So I guess in the movie, did they not have enough of a budget, like to be able to use that song multiple times?
To my knowledge, music rights don't work like that. If they bought the rights to use the song in the film, it can be used as many times as they would like to, at least as far as I know. In my opinion, the reason the Boombox Kid is hearing the news is because it announces that Laurie Strode was taken to the Haddonfield Memorial Hospital, and that's how the Shape learns where to go in order to find Laurie. Without that, he would never have found her.
Now that you mention it, it probably does work better that's how Michael kind of finds out where Laurie is instead of the Mr. Sandman, send me a dream. Okay. Because we definitely don't have the rights to that song. Michael's not really a bloodhound that can kind of sniff out a person either, I guess. And kind of continuing on with the novel, you mentioned the scene earlier where Bud is killed with Dick Warlock kind of telling him to kind of arch his back. And, in the novel, Bud was actually strangled to death with the stethoscope. It's possible that that's what happened in the movie too, but the viewer can't see it or hear it when it happens.
I don't see any reason why that could not be true. Michael was using stuff around the hospital to kill people with, and as you said, it's behind that kind of glass you can't really see through clearly, so there's no way to tell for certain in the film. But I say if Michael used a stethoscope in the book, then I'm willing to go with that when we count the bodies.
And I definitely think it's true that he used that kind of stethoscope too, because I'm assuming he already used up all the rope that he kind of stole from the hardware in the first film anyway.
Good call on that one. I think you're right about that.
Which, this just kind of popped into my mind, but Marcus in 2018 actually tried to kill Michael Myers with the stethoscope in that movie too. So it's just,
that's right.
So yeah, it's just interesting how these kind of play back and forth on each other. So let's go and continue with the novel before I get way off track again. So we see a scene in the movie where Laurie has some flashbacks, but those flashbacks are actually more prevalent in the novel. Laurie has flashbacks in the novel, including her walk home with Annie and Linda earlier in the day. She also has a dream where she's in the car with her parents, who were arguing in the front seat. So as she sits in the back seat with her doll, Mikey, she overhears her dad saying, he saw her. And after that, her mother turns and tells her, I'm not your mother.
Wow. We do get to hear Laurie's adopted mom say that she is not her mother in the movie flashbacks, but that scene in the novel sounds way more intense. I'll be honest. I got a little scared when you said I'm not your mother. I think it was the addition of the Mikey doll and her adopted father saying he saw her. But I was in that moment just now, and that kind of freaked me out a little. It was creepy in the film too, but when I was about 5 years old, I came out of my room to go to the bathroom, and I saw a woman turn and look blankly to her son and ask him in a haunting voice, "Who are you?" on TV, and it just terrified me. The concept of my mom not knowing who I am, for some reason, Miss Strode telling Laurie she's not her mother just taps into that old fear.
Oh, damn, man. Yeah, like that would definitely have to be a terrifying experience. So definitely seeing that kind of in the movie or the book, like it definitely makes sense to kind of give you some pause there to make you relive something like that. Holy shit. Just sounds intense, man.
It was.
Okay, so continuing on. So Janet, the nurse, or the nurse aide, that has to help Mr. Garrett with the radio is actually the one who spotted Michael in the novel. Janet spots Michael on the surveillance monitors, but she doesn't really do anything about it. She then finds Mr. Garrett's body and runs for help, ultimately ending up in Dr. Mixter's office where she was killed. And also in the novel, when Laurie is hiding in the floor of one of the patient's room, Michael walks right by the door and right past her. It wasn't until after that she actually closed the door. So, and also when Michael kills Jill in the novel, he originally used his other hand for support as he picked her up by the throat. Then the scalpel kind of dug deeper into her. He lets go and actually held her up by the one arm.
That actually makes a lot more sense logistically. I always thought that kill, while it looked cool, did not really measure up to reality. I think that without using his other hand to lift her up, she would have slid right off that scalpel, unless Michael has some kind of bionic wrist. Her weight would have caused the wrist to dip a little bit, and she would have slid right off, or the scalpel would have cut through her and she would have fallen. However, if she's being lifted up by his other arm, the scalpel and his wrist did not have to bear the full weight and could stay at an upward angle, allowing him to better hold her up.
Exactly. And yeah, the way they did that scene in the movie was just really cool because it's really kind of terrifying how he does that. But yeah, logistically, really hard to do. So at the very end, with the reporters on the scene. There's a couple attendants removing body bags, and they were joking about the whole thing, saying things like, somebody had a real nice cookout last night, and even if they find the pieces, there's no way in hell he's ever going to get it put back together again. You can count on that. And as the ambulance drives away, the driver asks Laurie who her parents are and where she lives. Staring blankly, she simply says, I don't know. I really don't.
Wow. Wow. That's crazy. So Laurie basically had a breakdown. That actually better explains how we see her in Halloween H2O, actually. She is utterly traumatized in H2O, and that actually sets the stage rather nicely for that.
And now that you kind of mention that absolutely makes perfect sense. She was so traumatized, over that night of seeing like some like her best friends like bodies like posed the way they are, and then being chased in a hospital and seeing other people die and blown up and all that stuff. Just have that complete and utter just breakdown. I mean, dude, I would too.
Right? It is definitely understandable. As we talked about in episode 2, we both prefer the Sarah Connor Laurie from the 2018 film instead of the traumatized and broken Laurie. But again, the response is understandable, and people heal and grow at different rates. In a rough draft of the script and in the novelization, Michael Myers was supposed to hide in the trunk of the blonde reporter's car. The car was to get a flat tire in an accident. She would go to her trunk, and Michael Myers would jump out, kill her, take her car, and drive to the hospital. What we got instead of that scene is the Shape walking by a sign that says Haddonfield Memorial Hospital this way, after hearing that Laurie had gone there on the Boombox Kids radio. But I've always wondered why the Shape did not go back to the Doyle house to kill Loomis and Laurie after he got back up from being shot. Halloween 2 makes a point about Laurie being Michael's sister and his true target. I mean, why leave just to track her down later?
I've got some thoughts about that too, but I want to back up here for just a minute and just talk about Deborah here for just a moment.
Okay.
So yeah, she's that kind of like news producer person that we kind of see briefly, but in the novel, it actually gives her a very more extensive role. And she really like got that kind of mediocre appearance at the Wallace house when like Annie's body was kind of brought out. And she has a chat with her assistant, Barry, who calls it a hot time in Hicksville. They keep trying to wrap Robert Mundy, but he keeps going on air. At that point, Deborah decides to head to Haddonfield Memorial to interview Laurie when she's pulled over for speeding. Then the cop, a man by the name of Officer Reddig, lets her off with a warning and tells her her front tire is going flat. So immediately after that, Deborah takes off speeding yet again, planning her next report and singing Mr. Sandman when her tire certainly just blows. And she starts changing it herself when a local pulls up in a pickup truck and starts to help her. Just as he finishes up, he decides to kind of get fresh with her and grabs her leg, and she flips out on him and yells at him to leave. After he does, she opens the trunk, and there it is. Out pops Michael, who stabs her in the throat, nearly beheading her. He then steals the car and speeds off towards the hospital. Gotta say, that's a horrible scene, and I'm glad it didn't make it because holy shit, that one would have been really intense.
I'm guessing it was probably pacing that caused that scene to be cut. But I totally love the near decapitation in that scene, and we're definitely counting that body later.
Yeah, as soon as I read that, I thought you'd want to make sure we counted that scene in the book.
Yeah, I see we're getting to know one another.
And that's really cool too. Like, we've been friends kind of, online for like, well, over a year, we've begun to kind of do this podcast, and man, it's just so much fun.
Oh, hell yeah. So here's an interesting bit of trivia for you. At around 11 minutes into the film, Alice's friend Sally, the girl on the phone in the beginning of the movie, tells her that the murders happened on Orange Grove. That is actually the name of the street where Halloween from 1978 and Halloween 2 from 1981 were filmed. The Wallace and Doyle houses portrayed in the films are on Orange Grove, just north of Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood, California. Also, as a quick side note, Alice's friend she was talking to on the phone was voiced by none other than Nancy Loomis, who played Annie Brackett in the 1978 film and reprised her role in Halloween 2 as Annie's corpse.
Oh man, wow. Like I never caught that before. And that's so amazing that Nancy Loomis was kind of able to come back, in that kind of small role with that. So I guess, technically, could you say that she's been in 3 movies then, right? Like she was in Halloween 78, Halloween 2 as a corpse and on the phone, and that little piece of her in Halloween Kills?
I personally would not count the appearance in Halloween Kills, as she did not actually come back to play the role. The footage of her in Halloween Kills is from Halloween 2. So I would personally just count her in the first 2 films if it were me.
Yeah, I totally get that. So it's like kind of sort of, but not technically. So that's cool. I'm totally good with that.
Right. It's a bit like splitting hairs. But let's move on to one of the Halloween 2's more famous scenes, or at least the making of the scene. Pamela Susan Shoop told Femme Fatales magazine in 2001 that she didn't want to do Halloween 2 because she hated horror movies and it required nudity, which she had never done before. But her manager pushed her into it by telling her it would be a high-profile production, and she reluctantly agreed. I want to add in there also that her manager was a bit pushy with it. When she said she didn't want to do the nudity scene, he actually said, "Who do you think you are? Everybody else does it. Why won't you do it?" I thought that was a bit of a pressuring there that I don't think was necessary, but she spent 2 days filming her nude scene, the famous jacuzzi scene, and hated every minute of it. She was crying on the way to the studio on day 2 and almost didn't even go in. The producers and her contract had promised her a closed set during the filming of her nude scenes, but she counted 19 people, mostly men, I might add, in that very small room watching her get undressed and do her nude scene each day. Director Rick Rosenthal even tried to get her to do the scene fully naked, which was not in the script or her contract, and she almost felt forced to do it before Deborah Hill stepped in and said she didn't have to do it. Apparently, Leo Rossi was not at all thrilled to do the scene either, but Rosenthal had gone to bat getting him the role, and Rossi felt that he owed him. In fact, it was Rossi that made Shoop finally feel comfortable enough to do it. According to both Leo Rossi and Shoop, however, the water in the jacuzzi, despite looking hot, was actually freezing cold.
That's such an asshole thing to do with Rosenthal. Like, you definitely see a few scenes like that in Resurrections as well, in 2002. Just some creepy old dude that wants to see someone else's tits, I guess. Holy shit. That is an intense scene with her desk and her face kind of getting melted off. And, that is a scene that just kind of feels out of place to me. Even the Halloween 1978 with PJ Souls' Linda character saying, "See anything you like?" Kind of can I get your ghost, Bob? That just kind of fits into the scene. But this jacuzzi scene, she's just getting dressed, to leave. So, there's no reason to kind of take away the towel. And but I do have to give huge props to Rossi though for making her feel comfortable with it, and for him not really liking to do it either. I mean, it definitely kind of goes back to that kind of thing where, actors and actresses are kind of forced to do things because they don't really have a lot of power, and then get it. So, I am hoping that Hollywood's kind of changed for the better now, certainly than what it used to be.
Well, I certainly hope so too. According to Rosenthal, he was actually willing to direct the scene naked, and even said the whole crew would join in him if that would make her more comfortable. In fact, if you ask Rosenthal, he will tell you that he stripped and directed the scene in a thong. Honestly, I'd rather be naked than be seen in a thong, but that's neither here nor there, I suppose. But according to Pamela Susan Shoop, no one, not a single person, stripped when Rosenthal suggested that. Either way, I have to give Deborah Hill props for stepping in and saying she didn't have to do that. I mean, at least someone in charge had her back.
We all know that Rosenthal had absolutely no intention to do that. Like, we know, like, we've seen, like, both of these films that he did, his just, like, fixation on all that. So I'm glad that Hill finally decided to, like, step in and just take care of it. And, as I said, I hope things have kind of changed for the better. But, like, even today, there's still things that kind of come out that just don't make a lot of sense.
Right. I think that they have changed for the better, at least somewhat. In fact, I would say that things started changing for the better in that direction as early as the 90s. It basically stopped being acceptable to just objectify women all the time. And as early as 1995, they were talking about those things and taking those things into consideration. But back to Halloween 2. In a TV interview from 1982, John Carpenter said that the boiler room sex scene had to be cut down to get the R rating. But check this out. The MPAA had no issues with the violence. I actually can't believe that, but it would not stay that way. The MPA would really start cracking down on some of the violence and horror starting in 1981. Sean Cunningham, one of the creators of Friday the 13th, felt like they even had something against him personally when other directors and producers would point to Friday the 13th as reasons why they should be able to get away with doing what they wanted to do. What's weird is that the MPAA did crack down hard on Friday the 13th Part 2 and My Bloody Valentine from the same year, but largely left Halloween 2 unedited.
That's really interesting. And I know a lot of things with like the rating system really began to change with the like introduction of that PG-13 rating. So I definitely think there was some crackdown on the violence even earlier in the 1980s for sure.
But back to Halloween 2, I should point out an inaccuracy between Halloween 1978 and Halloween 2 from 1981. In Halloween from 1978, Dr. Loomis indeed shoot the shape 6 times, as he says multiple times in Halloween 2. However, in the reshoot for Halloween 2, you hear 7 shots fired, and he even pulls the trigger an 8th time. What's more is that Loomis had a Smith & Wesson Model 15 Combat Masterpiece, which is a 6-shooter. It would seem that someone in the sound effects department did not see the original film or read the script for Halloween 2, where it is stated many times that it was only 6 shots. Also, because of the 3-year gap between filming 1978 film and the 81 sequel, the Wallace and Doyle house has changed a bit. A noticeable difference was in the Doyle house, which is where Michael falls off the balcony during the recap of the ending of the first film. But another noticeable difference is the Michael Myers fall. James Winburn, who is much taller than Dick Warlock, was able to just go over the railing and fall on his back. But Dick Warlock had to use a ramp to keep from flipping over. If you watch closely, you can see the difference.
I shot him 6 times. I shot him in the heart. He's our human. Sorry, I just had to. It was right there. Just had to.
It was.
So, while I can certainly kind of appreciate seeing the outside of Michael kind of falling off the balcony in 81. I do wish they'd made that more accurate with the sounds. Like, come on, man. That's just an easy one. If it's a 6-shooter, I can understand Loomis shooting him 6 times and maybe firing again and hearing the click. But man, that extra one just kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I was all right with the click. It kind of shows that that Loomis was kind of inflamed with passion there as he was firing it. You know what I mean? Because he clearly knew he had 6 bullets in there too. So I liked that. I liked the click shot, but that extra bullet. I mean, that's I that's something that should have been caught pretty easily, I think. I know I would certainly not hire that sound guy again, but certainly check this out. Loomis and Deputy Hunt go back to the Myers house, and the townspeople are all throwing rocks and stuff at the house. They have a small discussion about Michael coming back on his anniversary, during which time Hunt offers Loomis a cigarette and even tries to light it for him. But Loomis ignores him, so Hunt just gives him the lighter so he can light it himself. At this point, those kids come up and tell them that Ben Tramer didn't arrive at a party like he was supposed to, so Loomis and Hunt deduce that Myers is still alive and the body at the morgue must be Ben Tramer. This frustrates Loomis, and he threw the cigarette on the ground. Just then, Hunt receives a call about a break-in at the elementary school near Old Reservoir Road, and they ran off. But Loomis kept Deputy Hunt's yellow lighter. As a guy who used to smoke cigarettes, I noticed that. That is something that would have pissed off a smoker. They had to go light up this. They'd go to light up their cigarette next and realize that they can't smoke a cigarette because the person they were nice enough to give a cigarette to earlier stole their lighter. but Hunt never says anything. This is particularly weird, as John Carpenter himself smokes like a chimney. I am certain that he would have been more aware of such etiquette. Either way, it would seem that stealing the lighter was deliberate, as that was the same yellow Bic that he used to blow up the operating room from the hospital.
And as a non-smoker myself, but I do remember, like, used to be, like, before they really started like cracking down on all this stuff, you could get those little Bic lighters absolutely everywhere back in the day, and they were pretty affordable, and it seems like everyone had like 16 of them. It's like they just kind of like would just like pull things out, like, oh, here's one, and like they just pour like every pocket imaginable. They would just have some. But it's like, I do, like, I could understand how that would like piss someone off too. But I also kind of wonder about the intensity and the stress of the situation that Loomis and Hunt were kind of in. So it's like, I wonder if it's just like one of those like accidental things on like Loomis's part, from like him kind of accidentally keeping that. Like, sometimes, like, I might get a receipt that I have to sign, and I put the tip in, and sometimes I just kind of put the pen in my pocket and just go on about my day. And I just get distracted, and I just kind of accidentally keep that pen. So it's just a completely like unintentional thing, like nothing malicious meant, but just that easily like squirrel brain. It's like you just kind of get distracted. So I'm just wondering, do you think it was more of a stress issue, or like, and they just forgot, like, especially then, like getting a lot from someone else was like the easiest thing to do. Like you could get a lot before you get almost anything else. So, I'm wondering if that's just another possible take on it. And besides, that lighter, saved the day at the end.
No, you're totally right about that, and it could have been something like that. I think it stood out in particular because, as you said, the lighter saved the day. I guess I just want to attach some kind of intent there because it fits so well in the story, but it doesn't have to be there, and it could totally just have been an amazing accident.
Well, true, and you got to have some way for kind of have Dr. Loomis kind of get the lighter anyway, and that works because like in the 78 film, he just had the he picked up those rabbit in red matches, right? That would have been a little hard to kind of like strike off, and that like in the hospital there with Michael kind of bearing down on him.
Right. That's true. And it was a nice way to fit it into the story organically, I think. Um, until Halloween 2018, Halloween 2 was one of the only two Halloween films released by Universal Studios. After the massive success of the original 78 film, Universal Studios picked up the rights to the sequel. However, when Halloween 3 Season of the Witch did not do well, they gave up their rights to an affiliate named Trancas International, who produced films until 1989. In 1996, the rights were sold to Miramax. Universal Studios released Halloween 2 on Blu ray on September 13th, 2011. It is packaged as the 30th anniversary edition and includes deleted scenes, Pocket Blue app, and an alternate ending, and the 1984 documentary feature Terror in the Isles. The release immediately sparked controversy due to the fact that Universal removed the credit Mustafa Akkad Presents and replaced it with Universal and MCA Company Presents. In front of that, in a front that did not match the rest of the opening credits, I might add. Akkad's son, Malek Akkad, called the stunt disgusting. He went on to say that it is disgraced and obviously biased. Objectively, any horror fan would find this an insult to the man who has done so much to the series, and to come after his tragic death, he's not even around to defend himself. It's classless. I'm talking to Universal now, and they are looking into it. However, Akkad was still credited on the packaging. Fans immediately called for a boycott of the disc and set up a Facebook page. On November 28th, Universal started sending out emails announcing that the revised Blu-ray was now available, and for owners of the previous disc to provide the studio with their address and daytime phone numbers. Shout Factor re-released the film in a 2-disc collector's edition on September 18th, 2012, under its new Scream Factory label, with the new special features including 2 new audio commentaries, 2 new behind the scenes and deleted scenes, an alternate ending, the theatrical trailer, TV and radio spots, and a still gallery. The collector's edition also contains the TV cut, also called the producer's cut, along with a script of the film to download on the second DVD disc for both releases. And of course, the re-released restored Mustafa Akkad's credit.
You know, it really feels like all this change with the original material started when George Lucas started changing things with Star Wars when things went digital. I mean, it's just a really awful thing to do, to take Akkad's name off of it. Just keep his damn name on where it's supposed to be, right? Just leave it there. I mean, I'm glad they fixed it eventually, but to just pull that bullshit, man, just drives me crazy. It's maddening.
Oh, it really is. Just low blow. But now it's actually time for my favorite part of the show, when we count some corpses. So let's count the bodies in Halloween 2.
Let's go. I'm excited. Let's go. Okay.
Yeah. All right. The first death in Halloween 2 was Alice Martin. She was stabbed in the chest with a kitchen knife. The next to go was Ben Tramer. He was hit by a patrolman in a car, rammed into a van, and burned to death in the explosion. As a quick side note, Ben Tramer's death scene might have influenced the death scene in Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, where Ted Hollister was killed by the townspeople. Both characters died because they were confused with Michael due to similarities between their masks and outfits.
God damn it, Earl. It's Ted Hollister. Well, we will talk more about him soon and some theories I've kind of got about that character anyway. But, I'm glad that, Ben Tramer still continued to get some love, like in the new timeline as well. Especially like when Deputy Hawkins said, "I knew you were always kind of sweet for Ben Tramer." But we can kind of talk about that a little bit later. But man, I got a question I have to ask you. There's no way in hell that van and car blows up there, right? Like it's just not going to happen, right?
No. In fact, I'm pretty sure that if cars blew up even anywhere near as easily as they do in the movies, especially back in the 80s, no one would drive them. I mean, damn, if somebody threw a spitball at the car, they would blow up in the movies.
Exactly, man. It's like that one, like there's no way that that thing's going to catch fire and blow up like that. And, honestly, that cruiser wasn't going that fast. Like, I mean, with how drunk Ben Tramer was, I mean, his legs were going to be broken, of course, but I mean, he's probably going to walk away from that, right? Like, it's just, but it kind of drove the story, right? Like, and gave like a nice little foreshadowing of Michael's death, you could say.
Well, I mean, if I could just comment on that real quick before I go to the next kill. I always wondered why, as you mentioned, the car running into him would have busted up his legs, but it would not have killed him. What actually killed Ben Tramer was the fire that erupted. But, I mean, did you notice Ben Tramer just sat there quietly burning? There was no screaming or like, I'm on fire, or none of that. He just sat there and burned.
I mean, yeah, was he just that drunk? He didn't know what was going on. Was, he doing some other things other than alcohol to where he just had no fucks to give that, oh, I'm on fire. I just got hit by a car. Like, okay, I'll live with this, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm guessing so. Like, it seems like there had to be something extra there that, they probably didn't want to discuss in Ronald Reagan's America in 1981. We'll just leave that there.
Yeah, you probably make a good point there. The next kill, number 3 to be exact, was the news reporter Deborah we mentioned earlier, who was stabbed in the throat so severely that it nearly decapitated her in the novelization. I got a really good mental picture of that, and I think that's fucking awesome. But the 4th victim was Haddonfield Memorial Hospital security guard Bernard Garrett. He took a hammer claw to the head and then hung from one of those mechanic lights with the long extension cords. I find it interesting that Deputy Winslow from Friday the 13th died by getting a hammer claw to the head that same year in Friday the 13th Part 2. Granted, Garrett was just a security guard, but an enforcer of the rules nonetheless, and they both died in the same way. But that's just an observation. Either way, I think the hammer claw to the head is my favorite kill. Have we got to your favorite kill in Halloween 2 yet, James? If not, let me know when you get to it.
We've talked about it a little, and I almost hate to say it now because now that I've learned how badly the actress was treated in that scene. But originally it was going to be when Karen had her face like burned off after Bud was strangled with the stethoscope. Like those two back to back are like really good kills, but damn, once you kind of know how like poorly she was treated, like knowing that now, I'm definitely going to put that one closer to the bottom. So I'll save my favorite kill for just a little bit later.
Fair enough. Can't wait to hear your new pick. The 5th kill in Halloween 2 was Mr. I Need Your Pie himself, Vincent Scarlatti. And he was strangled with a stethoscope, as we talked about earlier. Karen Bailey was the next to go in the famous jacuzzi scene. She had her face burnt to shit by 200-degree water and then drowned. Number 7 to die was Frederick Mixture, and he was stabbed in the eyeball with a syringe. I'm guessing there was some sort of like air bubble injection going on there, because an injection of air is how the nurse dies in the same room. It's not clear as it happens off camera, but speaking of that nurse, number 8 was Janet Marshall, who gets an air bubble injected directly into her temple. Number 9 was Virginia Alves, who bled out one drop at a time off camera with a severed IV line hooked up to her arm. as I can't think of a single reason Alves would have had an IV hooked up to her arm, I have to assume that Michael hooked up that IV, which is actually kind of interesting. I also have to wonder if she was not drugged. I mean, imagine how long it would take to bleed out one drop at a time. And there probably had to be some blood thinners going on there too, because the blood would have coagulated if that was the case. Um, Jill Franco was the next to go, and she was stabbed in the back with the scalpel and lifted into the air as her clogs fell to the floor. As a quick side note, the clogs falling to the floor was totally Rick Rosenthal's idea, and I think it really sold that kill. And the 11th and final kill in Halloween 2 was Terrence Gumbel, whose throat was slit with a scalpel. At the end of the film, Hunt asks what the count is, and he is told 10 so far. But there are 18 deaths between the first and second movies, and 4 more are added to the tally when the novelizations are factored in, making it a total of 21 deaths.
Okay, so maybe we didn't necessarily get to my favorite one, and I guess it depends on how you want to do this. Do we count how Dr. Loomis and Michael died? Because I really like how Loomis said, "It's time, Michael," and then blows them both to Kingdom Come.
You make a good point there. At the end of Halloween 2, it seems pretty clear, like Ahab got his whale, that they both went down. So too did Loomis die with Michael. We find out, of course, that both of them survive in Halloween 4, but that was retroactive change to the Halloween 2 story. So that makes me want to count Halloween 2 as the end of the first timeline as of its release. And for that reason, I'm willing to count both of their deaths on a technical basis, if nothing else. So that would bring the corpse count up to 23. Oh crap, don't tell Jim Carrey.
That's great. But yes, but since that timeline was supposed to end there, so yeah, like if we have to kind of go on the assumption that they both died, then hell yeah, like I think that's just 2 amazing ones. I mean, Michael does kind of walk out there like he's got flames coming from like every like orifice possible before he finally falls, but just kind of a neat way to go if they both have to go out that way.
Sure, for sure. I can see why that would be a cool. It was definitely a cool kill in that scene. I think especially with that line like you're talking about, like "It's time, Michael." That really did make it pretty cool, and I like counting those 2. As for my final thoughts on the film, I really enjoyed Halloween 2. While I appreciated the minimalistic approach of the first film, I grew up in an age where gore was just part of horror. So I tend to prefer a film that has that in it. But that, again, is not intended to impugn the first film in any way. I'm merely pointing out that while some fans do not like the increased violence and gore, I appreciated it. Halloween 2 is still one of the best in the franchise as far as I'm concerned, and I see it as an extension of the original film. Like Halloween Kills, it would not be as good it's not be as good on its own without the first half of a night in the previous film. Also, as a final note, Halloween 2 was a box office success, grossing $25.5 million in the United States. While Halloween 2 was not as successful in the box office as the first film, it still did better than other 1981 horror films, including The Howling, Friday the 13th Part 2, and Final Conflict. So that says something about its quality right there.
I had no idea about that part. So yeah, like this film did like an amazing kind of box office success, for that year. But I agree with you too, because Halloween 2 definitely needs like Halloween 1978, because it doesn't really stand up well on its own to me either. Like it's definitely like a continuation of that story and really just kind of one movie kind of in and of itself to me.
Yeah.
But as we kind of talked about, I definitely like a lot of scenes from this film. Like, right before Mr. Garrett's killed, he goes to the trash cans, and that damn cat just jumps right out at him like, it's just intense. And honestly, that probably scares Mr. Garrett more than what it did when someone like broke into the storeroom when he called that over the radio. And I really like Leo Rossi's character in this movie where he plays Bud. He's just very pragmatic, and he does offer a little bit of comic relief as well as some sage advice to young, like college boy Jimmy in this film. Like, Jimmy basically stalks Laurie through the entire film. Like, she's getting stalked by two people. So one person's trying to kill her, and another one just won't leave her alone at all. And, Bud tells Jimmy, quote, "Patients are no good. It never works out. But nurses, that's a different story." And his poem, Amazing Grace, "Come sit on my face. Don't make me cry. I need your pie." It's just absolutely hilarious. But, you really get a sense for what Bud is all about in the movie. But, I think that overall, I've always really liked this film in so many different ways. And, while it's a bit different from the others, and now knowing that Rick Rosenthal is really just pretty much an ass, I might see it a little bit differently now. But the actors and the actors in it, they really just did a great job, and I still enjoy this movie.
Knowing that stuff about Rosenthal does taint the movie a little bit for me as well. But I still enjoy the movie, and I love watching it back to back with the first Halloween. I don't think that will ever change.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to change for me either. I just you really need them both.
You do. It's one of those sets of movies you just gotta watch the first and the second film together. It otherwise it's just not as fun. But thanks for hanging out with us, ghouls and goblins. So even though Randy expressly states that such declarations are dangerous in horror, I gotta say we'll be right back next month with a talk about Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers.
Mr.